Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A very warm welcome to our viewers around the world. On the eve of 18th annual Ijtima of Majlis Ansarullah Jamaat Ahmadiyya Sweden being held at Nassim Mosque in Gothenburg. As different events in connection with the annual gathering are underway, we are privileged to have with us a guest belonging to our Jamaat Ahmadiyya Norway, Brother Noor Ahmad Bølstad Sahib. Assalamu alaikum. Let me begin by saying that a convert Ahmadi is always a source of inspiration for all of us. And the first question that I would like to ask you in this connection would be, what inspired you to join Ahmadiyya movement in Islam? Who were the early Ahmadis that you met in Norway?
I became an Ahmadi Muslim, and to me it is very important to say Ahmadi Muslim because I'm a Muslim. I became an Ahmadi Muslim in, what do you say, according to Hijri Shamsi, it is 1336 in the month of Tabligh. It means in, February 1957. I was a rather young boy at that time. And the persons who helped me to find the truth, because to me this is the truth. That was Kamal Yusuf Saib, who had come as a missionary to the Scandinavian countries in 1956. And he, at that time, when I came into contact with him, he lived in Gothenburg. And I lived in Oslo, in Norway. And I came in contact with him due to a class fellow of mine. A class fellow of mine who had been interested in religion for some time, and who had got the address of Kamal Saib. This, my class fellow, he was my class fellow in the high school. He became an Ahmadi Muslim in, well, during the autumn 1956. Unfortunately, he left our Jamaat rather, well, not so long time afterwards. But he had given me the address of Kamal Saib, and I wrote a lot of letters to him. I got the Quran in German language. We did not have a complete Quran translation in Norwegian, but I read German quite well, I think. So I read it, the German translation, published by the German Jamaat. And I read a book about the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And for the first time, you see, you cannot imagine how the situation was in Western Europe and Scandinavia and Norway at that time. It was a country which was still Christian, Lutheran. We sent missionaries to other parts of the world. Other religions, we felt that was very strange things. And Islam, which was commonly called Mohammedanism, it was definitely not popular. And the few books which existed, they were very negative. And then I got this book, which gave me a totally another impression of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. This was really the background. And of course, this is now more, well, it is 50 years ago. But the way I remember it, it was, I read about this person, the Holy Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the impression I got was that this man, he was true. When I read about his life, how he suffered, and his very modest life at the time, he could be in a man with total power, and what a simple life he lived. And that person, when I read about him, I thought when he claims that he had got a revelation, then that is true. And that showed me the way to the Quran. And then since I believed in in him, I can say. Then I also believed in the teaching of the Quran. And that way I guess I had always had the idea that there is some kind of God. but then I really got this very, very strange, not strange, but, well, in a way strange, but very strong feeling of the existence of God, of one God. And then when you have, as I had at that time, this idea, and felt very strongly, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And that, I've often been asked questions about this. And to me, I was not against anything. I mean, I was not an enemy of other religions. It was not that. But I was attracted by this person and by this idea about the one God. And when I felt this so strongly, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, well, then I think, well, I have to take the consequence of that. And then, by the grace of Allah, I have to say that, then I learned to know Islam through a missionary from the Ahmadiyya movement. And that is, I think, very important, because the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, it's very peaceful teaching, is very important, but also the idea that about Messiah. Because that was also a bit problem for me. The Christians were talking about the Messiah, and the Jews were about the Messiah, and the Muslims about the Messiah and Mahdi, and Buddhists were waiting for some Messiah kind of person, and the Hindus. And there we had about Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him. That one person, he combines all these ideas. And for that reason, to me, it was the only logical answer to everything. It was this kind of teaching of Islam, which is in our Jamaat. Well, that is a long answer to your question, but well, I mean that is the background, and well, I was blessed with this, really.
Fine. We move on to next question. How did the rest of your family members react to your converting to Ahmadiyyat? Did anyone else in your family join the Jamaat?
No, as I said, at that time, the ideas in Norway were very negative about Islam, as they have become afterwards also. But at that time, I mean, we had a 1,000 years history of the Mohammedans there fighting, and the Crusades, and even in our sagas, the Viking sagas, we have some of our kings, they were fighting against those, I mean, those terrible people there in North Africa. I mean, the Mohammedans. So, and in our history books, it was very clear that we had been saved. I mean, Western Europe, Northern had been saved because the Saracens were stopped there, and people in Spain, what we call the Moors, Maurerne, they were stopped at the Battle of Poitiers, and I mean, these things saved Europe, and that was a part of our teaching, how we learned everything, and at that time, still, I think with the Western world, we felt that we were at the top, and all the others, they were still colonies, and they were underdeveloped and whatsoever. So I think we had this still feeling that we were here, and because we were here, our thinking was the right one, and our thinking was the Christianity and this Western kind of civilization. So I cannot say my family was not especially deeply religious, but they were, of course, also influenced by these ideas. And they had the idea that this Mohammedanism was not a good teaching. And I think also that they worried a bit, because, I mean, at that time I was a young boy, 15 and 16 years old, and they were a bit worried, well, what about him? This is a strange thing, and what will happen to him when he grows up? when he chooses something so special. So, and I got some trouble in the beginning. And I'm in trouble and trouble. It is very important for me to say that no persecution. I mean, so I cannot complain when we see what the Ahmadi Muslims suffer in other parts of the world. I mean, that is terrible. It is nothing like that in Norway. It never was. But I have my difficulties. And of course, every day, because I have made this very strange choice, every day when I came to my school, then my class fellows had made some new question. How could I do this? And how can you believe that? And so I think every day I had to be prepared to answer questions. So I had to read and think and think and think. And by the grace of Allah, I had Kamal Sahib. I could write letters to him.
Okay, I would like to ask you about your life before you became an Ahmadi Muslim. You were quite young.
Yes, I was very young. And of course, now I'm 66. And when I think about it, well, 51 years ago, I was rather young, yes. And I was interested, as I used to say, in two things. I love to play soccer. Really, I still love that game. I spent a lot of time playing soccer. And I love to read about the history. I read very much about many history books. Then some people, quite many I think, when you are in the age of 15, 16, 17, then you start thinking about, I mean, you are not satisfied by just being. You think, why am I? What am I? Why am I? Why am I born? What will happen when I die? And so on. These, in Norwegian, we call it existentielle spørsmål. I don't know, existential questions, or what do we call it in English? I do not know. Some basic questions. And that happened to me that spring in 1956 and the summer in 1956. And I read extremely many books. I have recalled that afterwards and looked at those books many years afterwards, and I'm a bit astonished that as such a young boy, how much I read. Yeah. But I think it is when you are young, it is almost incredible what you can do if you are interested in anything. I think it is like that. And to me, I had to find the answer. I mean, it was not just curiosity, but I felt I have to find answer to my questions. So I read, first of all, of course, many books about Christianity. And in Norway, still at that time, things have changed. But at that time, if you did something a bit strange, then you became a Roman Catholic. And I mean, I do not now mean to say that there is something strange with Roman Catholics, but I mean, Norway at that time, you were Christian, you belonged to the Lutheran State Church. And it was quite a special choice if you became, for example, Roman Catholic. But I read a lot about that and different other groups in Christianity, lots of them. And then I read about Judaism, the Jewish religion. I read about Baha'i, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And last of all, because this Mohammedanism, I mean, that was, who cared? This was only a strange thing. But then I became a bit curious because we had the book, at that time, we learned about what we called foreign religions in the first class in what we called gymnasium at that time. I mean, secondary part of the high school or something like that. And then it was some statistics, and it was written that, well, at that time, I think 380 million people were Mohammedans. I think it was that number. And I thought, 380 million or 400. I thought, they cannot be that stupid. I mean, so many people cannot be that stupid. So there must be something more about this religion than what we have learned and what is written in the books which I had at that time. And just in that moment, then I got the address of Kamal Sahib, and well, and I got these books which I mentioned before, and I read them, and I had lots of questions, and I wrote letters to him and to a Swedish Muslim also. And then, well.
In another way, God helped you.
Well, that is what I said in the beginning. I mean, one way you can say it is due to Allah.
Yeah.
And of course, I remember Muhammad Safirullah Khan, he once said something, and he said, and I still remember he said, by the sheer grace of Allah. I remember that word very well. By the sheer grace of Allah. And yes, and I think about myself, by the sheer grace of Allah. Yes.
And your change was bigger than one would expect. And what was your life after your change, or when you become an Ahmadi Muslim?
First of all, I felt peace. I mean, that is the basic change, of course. That and ever since that day, I have felt peace and gratefulness that I became an Ahmadi Muslim. Every day, I feel that very, very, very strong. But I mean, in the daily routines and so on, it is the prayer, but. In the daily life, it is, well, I couldn't eat pork anymore, and in Norway we eat quite much pork. I mean, that is everything, well, not everything, much is mixed with pork. So I had to be very careful. It was impossible to get anything halal. I mean, that was impossible for still decades, but at least I had to avoid the pork. And of course, no alcohol. And when it was served anything of alcohol, of course, I didn't touch that, and it always gave me an opportunity to talk about Islam, because I was always asked the question, well, I see that you don't touch alcohol, maybe because you are driving. I mean, that was maybe because I said, no, it is not because of that, it is because I'm a Muslim. And then, well, Muslim. Well, later on they knew. I mean, they all knew about it. But for many, many years, this gave me an opportunity to make tabligh, because then I could say, yes, I'm a Muslim, and then we had enough to talk about the rest of the evening.
Noor Sahib, the movement came to Norway in the mid-50s, and those were very difficult times for the Jamaat, because it had very limited manpower and financial resources. How did you see the Jamaat cope with all these difficulties?
I was a pupil, my brother and I, my mother was alone with my brother and me, and I can tell you, we did not have much money. So I could not support the Jamaat. I mean, it was a headache for me sometimes, really a headache, because sometimes we got some pamphlets and I had to distribute them. And how to get money for the stamps. I really had big trouble to get just a few crowns. Well, I managed, but it was really, it was felt like a burden, really, just to find a few crowns for the stamps. And I remember when Kamal Sahib, when he came to Scandinavia, he had to live a very, very simple life. He had this, I mean, now we have mosques, and you cannot imagine how it was done. He had this one room in some flat. He had one room. Sometimes he was not allowed to use the kitchen. Some places he was not allowed to receive any visitors. And to travel was, we could not afford to travel. It was still some years before I had got money enough so that I could take the bus trip to visit a Swedish Muslim. It is, well, we simply didn't, I still do not understand. And Kamal Sahib, when he came to Norway, when he had been to Sweden, then he came to Norway and stayed there in Oslo for some time before he was transferred to Gothenburg, no, to Copenhagen. And I can still remember that he was not allowed to, I don't think he was allowed to make food where he stayed. But I was allowed to visit him. He had a room, and then we were sitting there, and then, now and then, then he brought me down to a cafe, and he bought 1 cup of tea. I mean, he wanted to entertain me somehow. And we had a cup of tea, and we're sitting there for 2 hours or 3 hours with this 1 cup of tea. And well, I mean, I had no reason to complain, but what he did and how he survived, I still do not understand. I still do not understand it. And the Jamaat, the Jamaat, I mean, worldwide Jamaat was so very poor. And I will give you, even decades afterwards, I had the honor to meet the Khalifa, the third Khalifa sometimes. And he was in Oslo, and we desperately wanted to buy a house. That was in the 70s, sometime in the 70s. And I showed him that house, and he refused. And I was so sorry. I wept. I mean, I was so sorry. And some years afterwards, I didn't mention, of course, I didn't mention it again. But some years afterwards, when I visited him some, well, again, then he told me, "No, dear Noor," he said, "can you remember?" And of course, I could remember very well. And he said, I knew how important it was for you all, for the Jamaat. And I could see how sorry it was. But you have to believe, we couldn't afford it. I mean, the whole worldwide Jamaat, it was impossible. And it was a very, very, in a good offer and very nicely situated in Oslo. Very important. But the whole worldwide, it was impossible. And that was in the 1970s. I mean, of course, still we do not have much money, but compared to the situation then, it has changed so, by the grace of Allah, it has changed, it has been immensely changed.
In Ahmadiyyat, we practice as well as preach Islam actively. How difficult or easy did you find doing both the things simultaneously?
Well, as I said before, in my opinion, to be, and I often say it, I say it very often, to belong to a religious minority in Norway is not difficult. To be a Muslim in Norway is not difficult. Of course, you may get some trouble now and then because of the behavior of some so-called Muslims. But there is no law, no discrimination. When I started my studies, at that time, I could not become a teacher because then you had to belong to the Evangelical Lutheran Church. I mean, you had to be a member there to become a teacher in the primary school. But that was at that time, and before I finished my studies, that law was not any longer there. And I have served as an officer in the Air Force, in the anti-aircraft artillery. I have served many years as a secretary, well, many years as a secretary in a large teachers' union. I was secretary general in that teachers' union. I was a teacher for many years. And I was a headmaster for the last 11 years before I now retired. And I don't feel I have had trouble any time. I just say, I'm a Muslim. No, I don't drink. No, I do not eat pork. But so what? I cannot say that I felt any kind of persecution. But then to preach, of course, I must say that as a teacher, I've been very careful, because of course I could dare to think about using my position as a teacher to try to influence the pupils. I mean, that would, in my opinion, be definitely wrong. but I know that some pupils have been influenced, and now because I think they have a feeling that I have behaved in a good way or something like that. I've tried to preach Islam by trying to be a good Muslim. I tried to preach Islam. On occasions I mentioned when other people are taking beer and I do not, and then it gives me an opportunity. I think it is that is the way I have tried to preach. I'm not good. I mean, people are different. I'm not good at going to another person and say, now you should listen to me and I will tell you about Islam. I do not say that is wrong, but I am not that kind of type. But if people come to me and want to ask, then I like to answer.
How did Ahmadiyya spread in Norway ever since you joined the Ahmadiyya Jamaat?
Well, that is a question which is not so easy to answer, because I think, or may I say, I hope that there are a double answer to that question. We cannot say that Islam has spread very well in Norway. I mean, concerning converts, there are lots of Muslims in Norway now. There are lots of Ahmadi Muslims in Norway, but they are immigrants. I mean, most of them are immigrants. Yeah. And of course, there is nothing, no harm in that. But really, to me, that is, I pray much, and I've been thinking very much, why do we not succeed better in our tabligh work, converting Norwegians to Islam? And of course, I do not have the answer. If I had the answer, then maybe we had also had the solution. But I think that there are many reasons. As I said, 50 years ago, Norwegians were very much against the so-called Mohammedans. They regarded them to be, people of other, down there. Some kind of lower class. That these Mohammedans, they believe in some very strange and a bit stupid religion. I mean, it is terrible to use these words, but I mean, that was their idea. General. And later on, 50 years later on, or 40, 45, 50, now, unfortunately, they still have a negative impression. But that is not because of those reasons, but because of people who, in the name of Allah or in the name of Islam, kill people in the name of it. Well, I cannot talk more about it because I just will start crying. How Muslims, so-called Muslims, in the name of Islam, do cruel things, and I don't know whether they believe it or not. That is according to Islam. But whatever they believe is the fact is that it destroys so much. They cannot imagine how much it destroys for the tabligh work for Islam. And our Jamaat, we are persecuted in the larger parts of the Muslim world. Muslims who live in Western Europe, large group of them, they spend much time on writing pamphlets against us instead of writing positive things, trying to convert people to Islam. They spend the time on fighting against us. It is a terrible misuse of intelligence, and really. But and we now, I mean, when we as Ahmadi Muslims try to tell about Islam, we have to first say, well, no, we do not kill people. We are against jihad the way it is by weapons. We are against this. We are against that. We are against that. So, I mean, it takes so long time to explain all the things which we do not agree upon before we can start telling about what we really teach. I mean, so that is really a problem. And but I often think that maybe we never know, but maybe it is not. Maybe my generation will never see any success. But the work we do may bring fruits in the next generation.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. So because I mean, so that is why I say in a way I have a double answer, because I think that the work we do, I think inshallah it will bring fruits.
Yeah. Inshallah.
But it is just like the seed you put in the earth, and some seeds they have to lie there for years before they start growing, and maybe it is something like that. And we, of course, we just have to continue work, okay, and then one day, inshallah, that will happen. And of course, now and then I can get I can meet people who say, well. They refer to Kamal Sahib sometimes. They said, well, Kamal Yusuf, he was a missionary, he was in Oslo, he visited my school 20 years ago or 25 years ago, and still the impression we got, and because of him, and because of that impression, then we know that Islam is not, or not only, the way you read about in the papers about killing people and all these terrible things. So that is, I think, that is maybe that is the main importance of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat now, that we exist as an other kind of Islam, or showing in our ID, according to our ID, the true picture of Islam. And that these people, I mean, they do not become Muslims, but they have got a better impression of Islam. So maybe this may lead to that their children, or the next generation, they will read about Islam and learn about it with a more open mind, I think.
Yeah.
Inshallah. And due to the work of our Jamaat. And well, we have a few converts, and we have, I know there are some have become Ahmadi Muslims in Norway who are now living in other countries, but they visited our country and learned about our Jamaat there, and for that reason they are Ahmadi Muslims but live in other countries now. So I know there are a few fruits there by the grace of Allah. And of course, who could imagine, at least we still do not have a mosque in Oslo, we are building it, inshallah, but we have our own house. And that is a blessing, of course.
Fine, we move on to the next question. Noor Saab, what was it like spending time with different caliphs of the promised Messiah visiting Norway? Please tell us about your experience with, for instance, the third caliph.
Well, I unfortunately never met the second Khalifa. I will start with the second. You asked me about the third, but I will start with the second. Because I will start with the first one. Because of course I never met him, but he has always I've always been very interested in him. I think maybe only because of the name, because Noor there and Noor by me, which I will mention afterwards or tell more about afterwards. I think that we have these caliphs, these khalifas. I mean, that is so important. This khilafat, that is one of the main things which differs us from the other ones, other groups, and it is so important. And I've often thought about this, that moment when the promised Messiah, peace be upon him, when he passed away, and then what would happen? And then by the grace of Allah, we get the first Khalifa, and later on the second, and so on and so on. I became an Ahmadi Muslim, as I said, in 1957. That was during the time of the second Khalifa. But I never met him, and unfortunately, to go to Pakistan at that time, it was impossible. But that was I'm very, very grateful to him, because I became an Ahmadi Muslim when he was the Khalifa, and he gave me the name Noor Ahmad. So I'm very grateful for that, and I like that name. I like that name very much. But then I had the honor to be a convert. I think that gives us a special blessing. We get the opportunity to meet the Khalifas more often than most other of the members.
Quite true.
Because if we come to them, they find some time for us. I know that they try to find time for everyone, but at least I know that they find time for us. And when the Khalifa, when he visits a country, then of course, because we are a missionary Jamaat or Tabligh Jamaat, then of course any missionary would like to show the converts to the Khalifa. So there I am. So I had the honor and pleasure to meet the third Khalifa and fourth several times in Norway, and in 1974, that was my only trip so far to Pakistan. We came from all the world because of the terrible persecutions which had taken place that summer, and this decision of the parliament, of all the things. A parliament claims that we were non-Muslims. It is, well, you can see what happens in Pakistan, what has happened in Pakistan since then. But it was very important that we were coming from all parts of the world. So also from Scandinavia, it was a group traveling, and I went, and they met the third Khalifa in Rabwa also. And I still remember. There are so many impressions, but I still do. Of course, it was not allowed to make any kind of slogans. That was forbidden by law at that time. But I remember the Khalifa, he said, there were lots of soldiers standing around the place where we had the large meeting. So they were standing. And then he said, look at them, something like how beautiful it looks. Oh yes, everything like that. But I mean, at that time, I did not feel that as a threat. I felt that was also to defend us. I mean, I understood that they had to stand there and keep. But it was very special to see all these soldiers around in a very peaceful place, and all these soldiers. But then he said also that, well, look at them, and he gave some, how it looks, and now we get some possibility to let them hear what what we will say. I mean, they had to listen. They had to stand there and listen. And then he said, now we will shout, and then we shout slogans just 3 times or something, and then that was it. But it was tremendous. And then I was together with some other Scandinavian invited to his home, and so we were sitting in a room like this, I think, and it was very cold, and he had some, I don't know what this is called in English, some kind of this of metal, and it was burning some charcoal to make a bit less cold in the room. It was very simple. But I had then the honor to meet him also in Norway. He was also always very, very kind, and he knew a little Norwegian song for children, which he sang for me sometimes. And he was very interested in language, so we were talking about roots of the Norwegian words, this and that. So we had, of course, also the religious, I mean, talking about religious things, but I think sometimes he also, I mean, he also a Khalifa now and then he has to relax a little. So he can talk about other things, which also interests him. So we had, yeah, I have many nice memories. And we were traveling, showing him some parts of Norway. And I had the honor to be with him when we traveled. Well, lots of very wonderful memories.
Can you recall anything from the fourth caliph?
Oh, yes. It is much of the same. But I never met him in Pakistan. I mean, he had to run away from that country. It is very strange how a country can suppress and the most, I mean, the best citizens. I never have understood that language, that country. Anyhow, I met him many times in London, in Islamabad. He visited Norway several times, and we had, of course, I will not say discussions. Yeah, and you never discuss with the Khalifa, but he had many questions. I told him about well, the history of this country and the behavior of Norwegian people and such things. So we had many nice. Can you say, use the word chat? I don't know. I mean, it was very nice. And when he visited us, sometimes we had large meetings where we invited lots of dignitaries in Oslo, mayor and so on. I visited the mayor of Oslo at that time, together with the Khalifa once, among other things. But when we had a meeting, large meeting, and I had to translate, and my English is not very good. But but I had to translate it to Norwegian. Because of course not all Norwegians can English. So I had to translate, and one lady had a question, and then so he answered it with a quite long answer. And then I translated it very short. And then he looked at me and then he said, well, was that all? And then I had to explain to him afterwards, so I had to make it the translation a bit longer. Well, I loved really these two caliphs whom I met. And I had the honor to meet the fifth Khalifa, but only once in Oslo so far. But it is, I mean, it is a blessing that we have a Khalifa, and it is a blessing that we have the possibility to meet them.
Indeed. Noor Sahab, what books of the promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, have you read?
Well, it is difficult. I have read, I should not sit here as a liar. Definitely not. But it may also be that I have forgotten something. You see, slowly we have translated books into English. And I have read, of course, the philosophy of the teachings of Islam. And Tazkira, and the book about the, what is it called? I cannot, I mean, the story about these two martyrs, Afghan martyrs, it is shocking his story, really. Then I read some Psalms he has written, but I don't remember the title. Is it Tofat Baghdad or something?
Okay.
Yes. And then The Will, of course. And Jesus in India, and then I have read, some years ago came the English translation of the commentary of volume 1 of a commentary on the Holy Quran. And then we have now published, I think in English, three volumes. At least that of the three I have read. Some collected articles or from him. I mean, three volumes of these writings of the Promised Messiah. I guess that is what I've read. Yeah.
Okay, you have been engaged in many translations to the Norwegian language. What books of the Promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, have you translated?
Well, our Jamaat has translated, because I have not done much work myself concerning translation. I have revised it, but I have mostly written my own articles and speeches. What we have in Norwegian, we have published the philosophy of the teachings of Islam. We have translated into Norwegian Jesus in India. We have translated into Norwegian The Will. And we have translated into Norwegian a small booklet, and I simply have forgotten its name, because I read the correction just before I went here to this jalsa. So it will be in print in a few days, inshallah. But just now the title is out of my mind. Yes, I think that are the books we have translated into Norwegian.
You are also a Musi?
Yes. By the grace of Allah, it was accepted. I mean, that is decades ago. Yeah.
Well, you have had many friends here, so, Ahmadi Muslim friends. One of them was Abdussalam Mason Sahib of Denmark, and he was very dedicated and devoted Ahmadi and a good friend of yours. Would you please tell us about him?
Well, one of the negative things of growing elder or being elder is that too many of people you have known, they pass away. Abdulsalam Madsen unfortunately passed away last summer. Yeah. I used to say, and I really mean it, that when the history of Islam in Scandinavia will be written, and written by a person who does not hate Ahmadis, then there are two names which will be really standing there. The one name is Kamal Yusuf Sahib, who came here as the first missionary and really has dedicated his life and spent really his life for Islam. And the other name is Abdulsalam Madsen. And Abdulsalam Madsen, in a way, I don't think I could call him a friend, because he and I, we were so different people. I mean, he was so full of knowledge and so full of power and willing to fight and struggle. And I think myself, I don't have that knowledge, and I'm a bit more, I like peace. But I admired him. I admired him immensely. And of course, I could call him a friend. He and his wife visited us in Norway, and we had a very nice time. And I visited him in Denmark, in the little village where he lived in Højby. But we were not very close friends. But as I said, I admired him, and he is what he had done for Islam. And at the time when Islam in Denmark, it was the Ahmadiyya movement, and he in the 1960s and 70s, and later on also. But then the other groups came. But he was so active, and when he saw anything written in a paper which he didn't like about it, then he immediately called the editor and explained to him that he would have to correct it and so on. He was very, very active. Whenever he saw anything negative about Islam, he reacted immediately. He made lots of speeches. Many years he made the speech during the Friday prayer, and for many years after the Friday prayer, then people were just sitting in the mosque and staying there for hours, and they were eating together and they were discussing religious problems and questions, and so and he to me it seemed that he knew everything. He could answer everything, and he loved the Quran, and he translated the Quran into Danish. As far as I can understand, it is an extremely good translation. His translation has been published 5 times. I mean, small revisions, which you will always find something, but 5 times, and not published by our Jamaat or given away and such, but it published by an ordinary publisher in Denmark, and it has been published and republished, and 5 times. It is incredible, really.
Yeah.
And he has written a small book, which I always recommend. It is in Danish, Muhammad, Liv og Lære. It means Muhammad, life and teaching. Very small booklet, and still I talked about Islam, made speeches of Islam, I mean hundreds, thousands of times, I think. And still, when I go to a meeting to make a speech about Islam, in a class or in an association or whatsoever, then I have a brief look at that book. Again, I can it by heart, but still I have to look at that, because it explains in a so good way our teaching. Then he had published many other books also, written and published many other books. You cannot imagine how important a person he was for Islam. Yes, really, I admired him, really.
That was a big loss.
Yeah, it was a terrible loss.
Yeah.
And I do not understand how he can ever be replaced. And in a way, of course, he can never be, well, as a person he can never be. But also, it was a special situation, because now there are thousands of Muslims in Denmark from different countries. But at that time, there were only the few Danes. And Denmark, and because the mission was transferred from Sweden to Norway and then to Copenhagen, Copenhagen was the center for whole Scandinavia. And due to, I think, first and foremost, Mats time, we succeeded in building a mosque in Hvidovre in Copenhagen. And I think he was the main, well, I mean, due to him that we got this plot of land. It is due to the ladies in Jamaat that the mosque is built. That is important to say, yeah, because the ladies, Nusrat Jahan Mosque. But I was there. It was a strange summer because Madsen passed away, and I attended his funeral. And then just a few weeks afterwards, we were all together once again in Copenhagen to celebrate 40 years jubilee of the opening of the mosque. Really, I missed him terribly. And without him, I don't think we would have had that mosque. And even today, that is the only mosque, building built as a mosque, the only mosque in Copenhagen. Because I think the Danish authorities are they don't like the different groups of Muslims who are struggling and talking about jihad and killing and whatsoever. So still 40 years afterwards, this is the only mosque that exists in Copenhagen.
Yes, Noor Saab, we were talking about some other friends of yours who converted to Ahmadiyyat. For instance, Al-Hajj Nuh Sven Hansson of Denmark and Saiful Islam Mahmoud Eriksson of Sweden. Could you please shed some light on their personalities?
I will start with the second one. Saiful Islam Mahmoud Eriksson, because he was a Swede and he was an Ahmadi Muslim when I learned to know about Islam. And as I mentioned before, I wrote a lot of letters to Kamal Saib, but I also wrote a lot of letters to Saiful Islam Mahmoud Eriksson. And he helped me because his answers, they were also helping me to lead me to Islam. So, and I'm very grateful to him. He meant a lot to me. Unfortunately, I have not met him for decades, and I can say that I still miss him, really. He had very much knowledge about Islam and was a very kind person. Haji Nuh Sven Hansson, he became an Ahmadi Muslim. He had been a Muslim for a long time, but later on he became an Ahmadi Muslim. So he became an Ahmadi Muslim after me. I have met him several times. Now he lives in Malaysia. So now I see him only now and then we use email. That is a person I love, really. His personality, well, just to meet him is a blessing. I cannot say more. I'm only so sorry that that Malaysia is so far away from Norway, or Norway is so far away from Malaysia. But I'm very sorry for the larger distance. But he's very close to me in my heart. That I've tremendous personality. And he has suffered. He has suffered because of his choice, because he became an Ahmadi Muslim. I have never suffered. He has suffered because of that choice he has made. Yeah.
Fine, we come to the concluding question of this session. What would be your message to the Europeans with regard to Islam?
To the Europeans, my message will be, forget all you have heard about Islam. Forget everything. When any person stands up and claims that I do this in the name of Islam, this jihad, and all these negative things, forget it. And try to find Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat. Try to find the nearest missionary or Ahmadi Muslim or what, and ask that person about Islam, because that is the true Islam. You don't believe it, that Islam means peace, because so many Muslims try to prove that it doesn't mean peace. But believe me, Islam means peace. And Islam means peace here in your heart, and through that peace in the hearts, we will, inshallah, one day also get peace in the world. So Islam will mean peace not only for the single person, but for the whole world. But that will be through the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat.
Inshallah. Many thanks to you, Noor Ahmed Bølstad Sahib, for sharing your thoughts with us and for coming all the way from Norway to attend the annual Ijtima of Majlis Ansarullah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with you. With that, we conclude our program, which has been an MTA presentation from Sweden. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.